Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. Episode 331, and we are falling down another gear rabbit hole. And this is all about, my intention is to help you if you are shopping for gear, or maybe if you're organizing your gear, helping you think about a way to optimize your gear, both in your closet and on the water, and even how to get the most bang for your buck. So there's a few different mentalities one can have when putting together equipment. One of them is to have a reel for every rod. This is a great way to approach your fishing, and here's why. You can use a rod with a reel, and you can't use a rod without a reel. I know that this is a complicated concept, but you can use a rod with a reel. You can't use a rod without a reel. And so if you only have one nice reel and you have two fly rods, say you have a 5-weight, a little more delicate, a 6-weight, maybe a little bit more heavy duty, and you have a reel that straddles both of those line weights, very common, a 5-6 reel or a 5 to a 7 reel, and you can only use that one reel on each rod one at a time, even if you have two spools. So this is one of the things that I did early on in my fishing, is I got a 6-weight and I got a nice reel for it, and I fished it and fished it and fished it. And then I picked up a 5-weight, and instead of going out and buying a new reel, I saved money by buying a spool. And of course, for those of you who are newer to the sport, every fly reel, with a few exceptions, and I'll talk about a couple of those here at the end of the podcast, every fly reel is made up of two main components. There's the frame or the body of the reel, and this is what attaches to your reel seat, what screws in just below the cork. And then there is the spool. Now, the frame is usually where most of the mechanical parts, the guts are, the kind of the stuff that, especially on nicer reels, differentiate it and make it a more effective and powerful fish fighting tool. Whereas the spool, although there may be a few mechanical parts, is really only there to hold line and revolve around that axis and be engaged by that drag system of that reel body or reel frame. And so consequently, the spools are usually less expensive. There's no perfect formula. Usually it's about 30% of the cost. So like a $175 reel is going to have $100, $90 spools, something like that. And so that's how I started fishing. Is I think with my first 4 rods, I only have 2 reels. And this was totally fine if you're only fishing one rod at a time. And for you, that might be a perfectly suitable situation. But as I started fishing more and more, I found that I was wanting to have another rod rigged up either in the car, or as I fished in boats more, or as I started wading on bigger water, both larger rivers and in the ocean, I wanted to have a second rod on my person rigged up and ready to go. So again, in a boat, that makes total sense. If you're fishing a drift boat with yourself or with a guide, you know that you probably have at least 2 or 3 rods rigged up and ready to roll at any given time. You don't want to have to stop and disassemble that dry fly leader and put on a whole nymph rig, or have a compromise because you're fishing that 5-weight and all of a sudden a really deep hole or a nice undercut bank comes along and you want to be able to throw a big streamer over there. You want rods that are ready to go. And so if you own it, and not saying you have to, not saying that you are not an angler that is serious about what he wants to do or she wants to do, if you only have a couple rods and you only bring one on the water, but if you do have multiple rods and you are fishing bigger water, or you are fishing in water that can utilize multiple pieces of equipment, then it's helpful if you have a reel for each rod, because it is a lot of work to thread all of those guides with your line, and then rig up and then take the reel off of one rod and put it on the other, the whole 9 yards. So it is nice to be able to have a reel that has multiple spools that you can fish on multiple rods. But depending on the kind of fishing that you're doing, you might want to consider having a reel for each rod. But this brings up another point. For most trout fishing situations and most warm water fishing situations, I'm mostly thinking about bass, largemouth and smallmouth, not necessarily big, gnarly, truthy critters that require a lot of drag, even carp for that matter. But you can get away with a lot less reel than you might think. And I can say from experience, and also from having conversations with a lot of folks that do this full time, the real high-end reels are nice and they are going to perform, but the technology and the engineering in those medium price reels, especially from the big name companies, are going to perform just fine. What this allows you to do is it allows you to get a reel for each rod. But I want to go beyond that. I know I'm 5 minutes into this. I want to go beyond just getting a reel for each rod that is a little bit more economical, so you have that flexibility of having a reel on any given rod at any time, and talk about something that we don't promote, I guess, in the fly fishing world. There's a lot of people that do this, and there's a lot of people that are huge aficionados and scream this from the mountaintops. But I don't think, generally speaking, you talk about it enough, and that is buying a reel and getting a lot of spools off the bat, as opposed to buying a nice reel and not having a spool, or maybe only having one spool. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's just take a couple, one stalwart reel for example, the Lamson Liquid S. So this is a relatively inexpensive reel. I think it retails for like $150 or something like that. But you can, for $240, which is the price of a really moderately priced reel by itself, but for $240, you get their 5-weight rated reel, and you can go down to a 4 and up to a 6 with it, and 2 spools for $240. So for the same price that you would buy a moderately, priced reel on a lot of different manufacturers, Lamson, when their Liquid S, gets you a 3-pack, 1 reel and 2 spools for $240. Similarly, Orvis just re-released their Clearwater reel, and for that similar reel, I think they have the 3 to 5 or the 5 to 7. It's around $220. So you get a spool, 3 spools and 1 reel and a little carrying case. Now these are not machined reels. These are cast reels, but again, they're going to perform more than sufficiently in most of your trout fishing and most of your warm water fishing. You can jump up. Cheeky, they have some machined reels that will run in the $400 range for a reel and 2 spools, and actually they have a cast reel, I believe, that is a 1 reel and 2 spools for around $250, $270. But all that to say, this is a wonderful option for an angler who wants to set themselves up for success, to set yourself up for spending more money on more opportunities. So I am not going to begrudge anyone who wants to buy a $500 reel. I have some really nice reels, and I really, really like them. But if I were to start from scratch, I think if I only had a finite amount of resources, then I would prefer to get one of these 3 spool kits. The one from Lamps and the one from Orvis have very, very good reviews. They're very, very functional, and they perform very well. Buy that, and then put 2 lines on it right away. So now you're in at about $350, and you have 1 reel and 2 lines. And for most of these anglers, again, talking about most trout anglers and most warm water anglers, you start with that floating line. And for trout fishing, that's going to cover the vast majority of your situations. And for warm water fishing, that's going to cover probably about half of them. Especially when you're thinking about fishing poppers, you're fishing gurglers, you're fishing just immediate subsurface flies, especially in that first foot of the water column. That floating fly line is going to do a great job, and it doesn't need to be anything particularly fancy. I mean, I say that, and I, of course, also am a big advocate of buying the right fly line for the application. But with a floating fly line, throwing medium-sized bass poppers, you're going to be totally fine. And then your second line can be a sinking line. Now, this is not a podcast in which I'm going to get into the details of all the different options of sinking and intermediate. But if you are fishing a trout river where there is deep water and you want to fish streamers, then having access to some sort of intermediate line is a great idea. Something that is going to drop down a few feet into that water column over the course of a regular drift, getting your fly down deeper, especially something like a streamer, where otherwise, as you would cast and you'd be making that retrieve, that line would be coming up in the water column on its own, and of course then pulling that fly up. Now, if you're fishing rivers that are 2 feet of water, this isn't necessary. But if you're fishing rivers that drop down into those 5, 7, 10, 15-foot holes, then you're going to want something like this to really probe that water. The same thing is true for fishing bass, largemouth, smallmouth, and I would even say fishing for large panfish, being aggressive and going after the biggest examples of those species. Having that sinking or intermediate fly line is essential for getting those flies down deep and chasing those fish where they are chasing their bait fish. And you have that flexibility, and in a really economical way if you pick up a reel that has an inexpensive spool option. So again, I listed off these two examples, the Orvis Clearwater and the Lamson Liquid S. Those are great because you get them all bang, bang, bang right away. It's a little bit cheaper than buying them separately. But of course, many of the major manufacturers will sell you spare spools. Now, a technology that isn't super popular in the United States, it has been from time to time, but you see it more in European settings. And again, someone could correct me on this, but this is just from my experience, is cassette fly reels. Now, what is a cassette fly reel? Well, this takes the concept one step further, and this is actually a system and a situation that really emphasizes having lots of different lines for the party. It's more important to have more lines on a good reel than it is to have an exceptional reel. And some of these reels, though, again, they're just rock solid. So Gray's, which is part of the Hardy Gray's situation, they have a cassette reel for $130, and I think those spools are only like $15 or $30. I'm sure you can get them on sale. I'm sure you can get combos, but they make them not just for trout size, but all the way up to a 10 weight. And the way that this works is there's actually there's the frame, there's the spool, and then there's a separate cassette. It looks like a plastic spool, and it slides onto the spool, and then it slides into the frame. So you actually have a third piece that is incredibly lightweight and incredibly inexpensive. And so now you're not buying a spool, you're buying something that slides onto that spool, and it locks in. Every different manufacturer is going to have a different design. But these are usually going to be a real high density plastic. And so you're not engaging the spool. You're not engaging the cassette. The cassette is going onto the spool, and the spool is going onto the reel. And so this doesn't need to be any sort of fancy system. But Hardy, so another English company, they actually have a cassette fly reel that retails for, in the larger line weights, over $400. And this is a big, beefy cassette reel. And why is it? It is, generally speaking, a lighter reel because it has some high-density plastic pieces. And it also gives you the options of using more lines. This is a real underappreciated aspect of fly fishing. And I think a lot of people are coming around to it, though. And here's a few reasons why. One is they understand that to adequately fish with a tight line nymphing situation, you probably should be using different line than you normally use. And so I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of the specialized reels that have come out in the last 5 years are reels that are designed for Euro nymphing. And even if you're not a Euro nymphing, fanatic, you can see what they're trying to do. Really tight tolerances so that there's no way for that really thin running line or those long monoliters that are used in Euro nymphing to slip in between different parts, which again, if you can make tight tolerances in a fly reel, you should do it for everybody, not just for the Euro nymphers, but that's just me. Secondly, weight options. You're able to weight them differently so that you can get that balance. I've talked about balancing fly reels ad nauseum, and I think it's one of those underappreciated aspects of picking out gear. But this would be your third option. So say you buy one of these spool 3-packs. Now you have one reel, your floating line, your intermediate line, and your Euro nymphing line. And you're into this for probably the same cost as a really nice premium reel, or even cheaper. I mean, some of these trout reels retail easily for $500-$600. Well, for under $450, you have a reel and you have 3 fly lines that you can use at a drop of a hat. And so, again, going back to kind of my initial premise, which is, a reel for every fly rod. Okay, if you're going to do that, this is a wise way to do that. You don't have to break the bank on a reel. Or what you could do even is if you were able to, say you have the 5 and the 6 weight, you get 2 of these reels and you get a whole mishmash of spools and you can bounce them around with one another. Another unappreciated aspect of fly fishing gear is how you don't need to necessarily use that line that says it's for a 5 weight on that 5 weight rod. Especially these days, there's a lot of rod lines that are like 5.9 weights. I cast a line this winter at the fly fishing show, and it loaded that rod beautifully. That 5-weight rod just bent like crazy, but it cast really well. And I went back and looked at the specs, and this thing was just a hair's breadth away from being a 6-weight. Okay, that's all fine and good, and maybe that's more detail than a lot of anglers want to pay attention. But say you have two of the exact same reel, and you have, a whole just box of spools full of different lines. You can now have them both loaded up, and you have your intermediate line thrown on your 6-weight, and you have your floating line thrown on your 5-weight. And then if something changes during the day, you go into your vest, you go into your backpack, you pull out a different spool, you throw it on there, and now you're good to go. And the investment is so much lower than if you were to buy a premium fly reel for each rod, or if you were to buy a different reel and load that with a different line. So maybe this sounds like much ado about nothing. Maybe this sounds like I'm overthinking it. But my desire for folks is not that they buy the lowest quality gear or the most inexpensive gear. All right. I don't think that that's wise. I think, especially with fly line in particular, and then the build of your fly reel. I don't care if you fish a cast. I fish a lot of cast reels. So die cast reels, reels that are made out of some sort of molten whatever. I fish a lot of machine reels that are really, really nice. But I think as long as you're fishing reputable, good gear, you've checked out the reviews, you've played with it yourself, go and fish it, even if it isn't expensive. I'm not saying you have to go cheap. Nor am I saying, and I talked about this last week a little bit, that you need to buy the best stuff. And I think I've made that abundantly clear. I like some of the high-end trout reels with the sealed disc drags that could stop a tarpon. And so, the 14-inch browns you encounter on your little medium-sized stream, they're not going to stand a chance. I think it's nice to have a reel that you're never going to have to clean, you're never going to have to, repair, that you're never going to have to think about. But I'm also fine with spending a quarter of that price and getting something that after I run it through the under the water of my sink, it's going to be good to go for the next few months. And then I also have enough money to buy a couple of spools and a couple of lines, and I have that ability to fish in all sorts of different situations and circumstances. So that's kind of the thesis behind this podcast episode. It's as you are considering, okay, I've got 2 rods, or I want 2 rods, or I need to add a reel to my my assortment of gear. This is a really good option. And I'm glad that Orvis is kind of pushing their reel. Lamson's been doing this for a while. I know Cheeky's another brand that I mentioned that sells a 3-pack of with a reel and 2 spools. And then that reels are, I don't want to say they're coming back because they've always been around. I remember when I worked for Orvis, we sold a cassette reel, and I think they actually just discontinued another one. But I think that probably has to do with consumer bias here in the United States. I think we look at that and we think that's weird. But another English company that I was looking at some of their gear, and actually I'll talk about one of their fly lines at the end of this episode. They're coming out with a brand new cassette reel here in 2025, and it seems like it has the same engineering and the same effort and the same seriousness of anything else. And so even though it's not something we're familiar with, I think especially for trout applications, it's going to be totally fine. Most of your trout reels are not going to break down because of fish. Most of your trout reels are going to break down because of you dropping them, getting them filled with gunk, maybe breaking a spring because of it getting rusty, something like that. It's not going to be the fish that you have to worry about when it comes to most of your trout reels. Now, that said, do I use disc drag? Absolutely, and I take care of it. But it's a balancing act. Where do you fish? How do you fish? Where do you want to throw your money? And this is even one of those things where if you say, I don't want to buy a second fly line now, but I do like the idea of doing it down the road, I think it's a great idea to buy one of these reels where you can buy a couple more spools and have them at your disposal. So actually, after I finish this podcast, I'm going to my drawer. I think it's about time I go through all of my fly reels, see what leaders need to be clipped off and retied on, see what lines I forgot to clean at the end of last season, and just make sure that I have the right lines and the right spools for the right rods as I go into this season in earnest. Have you used a multi-spool system where you don't just have maybe one, but you have maybe 2 or 3 extra spools for a reel? Have you used a cassette system? let me know. I'd love to hear it. Matthew@castingacross.com. I'm always interested in hearing people's interactions and their experiences with the content that we talk about here on Casting Across. And if you have specific questions about a particular brand or a technology, don't hesitate to reach out. Even if I don't know the answer, I will send you in the direction of somebody who very well may have that. That is what I like doing here on Casting Across. This week on Casting Across, the first article that came out was called Feature Rich Fly Line from Sunray. And this is a review of their Kevlar Easy Backcast, Kevlar No Knot Easy Backcast Fly Line. That's a mouthful of a title. Kevlar No Knot Easy Backcast. Well, it's a great fly line, and it does some really cool things really well. I would not say it is an all-purpose fly line, but I talk about two applications where I think it really, really shines, and I'm really excited about using it more as this season comes. So you can check out that article. This is Sunray's a English company, and so they do some different stuff, including that cassette reel that's coming out here, I guess, in a couple of months. That looks kind of cool. So check them out. There's a link to them in that article from March 10th of this week. And then Wednesday's article is called Video Messing with Fly Fishing in Texas. Start here. Another book review video. This one it's about one book, Fly Fishing Dallas. It's actually called Urban Fly Fishing Dallas and Fort Worth. But this is the third book in the local angler series from Imberfrex Books. And they are all on Texas cities, Houston, Austin, and Dallas. And they're really well put together. So I show off one of these books in this video. So if you're not subscribed to me on YouTube, head over there. It's just Casting Across. You'll see me and my growing library of video book reviews. It'd be great if you subscribed and check those out. This week's recommendation on the podcast is actually something I've recommended before. And it's if you are a new listener and you have a favorite fly shop, can you do me a favor? Head to Casting Across. At the top of the website, both on the mobile browser and on the desktop version, there's a link that says something to the effect of Fly Shop Directory. If you go there, see if your favorite fly shop's there. See if your least favorite the fly shop you hate, I don't care. See if any fly shop in your circle is there or not. And if it's not there, please let me know. I desire to showcase all the fly shops in our great country. And if I'm missing one, or if you see one there that you know is closed down, please let me know. Matthew@castingacross.com, or you can use the contact me form on the website. I just never want to be slack in this, because if I can appreciate if somebody heads to the website and they say, I'm going to go to this fly shop, and they go there and it doesn't exist anymore, then that's a problem. Or if they see it and they say, this is really outdated, it ceases to be useful and valuable. And so please do check that out. I really appreciate all of those of you who have added. I think I put in about 2/3 to 3/4 of those fly shops, and the rest came from viewers. Yeah, I guess now with YouTube, they are viewers, listeners, and readers that have rounded it out. So definitely check that out and let me know if you have any feedback. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast on iTunes. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.